Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the PictureMonk Photography Podcast. This is Jordan from PictureMonk.com, and welcome to another brand new episode. Because of family and work and a whole bunch of stuff that happened this week, I haven't had a whole lot of free time to devote much stuff to the website and the YouTube channel. I was able to get one video out there today, last week that was adding fog to your images, like a way to add fog in Photoshop. Really easy way to do that. So if you haven't checked that out, head on over to PictureMonk.com and check that out there. Or go to my YouTube channel, PictureMonk.com/YouTube. That'll take you there and you can check that out. So what I wanted to do is, I think I'm going to break this episode up into two parts. I'm not going to go drill too deeply in a bunch of stuff in this particular podcast, but this one's going to be about time-lapse photography and some easy ways to get into it, and some accessories you might need, some settings, but I might save that part till the next episode. So we'll just see how it goes. But first I'm going to start off with some news. And the news article, it's just one little quick video that I found that I thought was pretty interesting. It's not the typical news that I would normally do, where there's a video of a photographer talking about this or whatever, but it's actually a short clip that basically they hired a bunch of photographers. I think it was 9 or 8 or somewhere around there. They hired some photographers to come take photos of stuff. And when they got to the place to shoot, it was just a big white empty room, and they had to create something out of nothing. That was the whole point of the experiment. And so, you kind of watch the photographers kind of just stare at an empty room and just, look around and go, what am I going to take a picture of? There's nothing here. So they have to basically create something that doesn't exist and get a good artistic photo out of it. So, it's not a real long video. It's just a couple minutes, but, it's pretty fun to see the stuff that they come out with. They may have found a piece of lint on the floor and they have to try to get a creative picture out of that. But then, they may make something of their own. There's a couple guys that were making photos of their shadows that were hitting parts of the room. So I just thought it was kind of neat and kind of a different way of looking at things. So I thought that was pretty neat. So go to PictureMonk.com/PMP046 and you can see the link to that video there. I'll link it there. So the listener question of the week, and what basically spawned this whole photography, time-lapse photography, podcast topic, it was, from a Rachel Willis, and that, she basically wrote, it was a very long email, but I'm trying to grab the parts out of it here that were pertinent to this, episode, and that, she basically said, I want to get started in time-lapse photography. What exactly do I need? Because there's a lot of stuff out there. So, Rachel, I hope you don't mind me paraphrasing your question there, but, so I'm basically going to cover all of that in this episode, for the most part. So let's go right into the topic. And so basically, Rachel, this whole episode is devoted to your question. So congratulations. All right. So first of all, one thing I want to link to in the show notes for this is I want to link to a bunch of really, really awesome time-lapse photography, just composition videos, and they throw a whole bunch of cool stuff in one video and just make a, composite of a bunch of really awesome time-lapse photography. There's one that's a particular one that's one of my favorites, and it is TSO Photography. This guy, I can't remember his real name. I just had it a little bit ago. But he basically does these really awesome, time-lapse, photography, videos, and it's just of various things. One of my favorite ones, and there's been a bunch of people that have done this, but the one I first saw with him was, he was in a top of a mountain, and the clouds, he was so high up that the clouds were below the mountain. And, I guess it was just kind of like a foggy day or something. But you could see the clouds kind of doing a wave, like a rolling. And I'm going to try to find that video, and I'll put it there to you, so you can watch it. And I'm also going to include, I think it's basically a Kessler video. So Kessler makes, it's a company that makes like cranes, and they make automated time-lapse stuff. They make a bunch of other stuff, but that's what I know them from. And so they made a video of a bunch of guys. I think they got a cabin to go take time-lapse photography, and they all stayed in the cabin. But then when they went to go to the spot, they all camped out in their cars overnight because they were doing night time-lapse photography. And it's just kind of a fun thing because they had, I think the brakes were giving out on the car when they were trying to get about, so they had to cool the brakes down with some water because it was a bumpy road. And I don't know, it's just a fun video to see. But I think it's basically a Kessler advertisement. I could be wrong, but they talk about that stuff a lot. So I'm going to link to a bunch of cool time-lapse videos. If you guys know of any that you are fans of, please tweet those to me, Facebook message them, email them, whatever. Send those to me my way because I want to check those out. I'm a really big fan of time-lapses. So basically what is a time-lapse? It's a series of stills, most of the time. It's a series of stills that are taken certain seconds apart and composited into one video file, rolling at 24 frames a second, 30 frames per second, 60 frames a second, stuff like that. So imagine just taking your camera and the crude way to doing it, taking your camera and pointing it out the window, and every 5 seconds taking a picture manually with your finger, just hitting the shutter button, and then wait another 5 seconds, take another picture, wait another 5 seconds, take another picture. You get the idea. So it's basically that. And then once you have those files, you take them and put them, squish them into a video, so that each one of those files or each one of those frames are ran through real fast, making it a time lapse. So you can cover a whole bunch of time that's elapsed. Maybe you went 30 minutes, you took 30 minutes of pictures. You probably only get like 10 seconds or something like that of video, but that you basically squish 30 minutes into 10 seconds. So it's kind of a fun thing to do, especially on the right subject. So I covered basically what is a time lapse. So one thing that a lot of people ask is, should I take a time lapse with my DSLR or my mirrorless camera? Or should I take it with like an action camera, sort of like the GoPro? Or should I use my phone? So there's advantages and disadvantages to all of these. So let's start out with the DSLR. That's mainly what I would take photos or time-lapse photography on with my camera. You get a much higher quality image. The downside of that is, it's up to you to do all the controls. So something like your iPhone or whatever, you can basically just set it on something, hit go, and it does everything for you. You can set it to where it go, like 2 seconds or 5 seconds or however long, and that's all you need to do. Just you let it go. But with like a DSLR, you need to make sure you have the exposure right. Because you want to make sure your exposure is consistent all the way through. If you're taking a picture of a sunset or something like that, you may start off with the right exposure, but as the sun goes down, your picture gets darker. So you have to know when to, let that alone, because if you keep changing the exposure manually as the sun goes down to get a correct image, you're going to get flickering in your image, because it's going to be like, dark light, dark light, dark light, dark light, that kind of thing. So that's one disadvantage to a DSLR. But with a DSLR, you have a whole bunch of information that you can play around with in post. That's one cool thing about it. Much like the iPhone, the action camera or GoPro is kind of a set it and forget it sort of thing. Again, you really only need to, choose 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. If you have that functionality in your camera of how far apart you want the images taken, and then you just let it go. The cool thing with the GoPro is you do have a real wide angle of view. Some of them do take very good stills. They are JPEGs, but I'm going to get into that as well. There's disadvantages and advantages to both. Again, I prefer the DSLR method because, I can choose to shoot RAW if I want to, or I can choose to shoot JPEG, which normally I do, and I'll tell you why in just a second. So with the DSLR, what I basically do is set my camera up And I used to use what's called an intervalometer. And an intervalometer is a little remote that you plug into the side of your camera, and you tell it, you want to take 2 seconds apart from the images. You want to delay the exposure a little bit when you first start off, and just you click up to lock it and it starts going. With Canons, you do have to buy an external intervalometer like that, and I'll link to that in the show notes as well. So you can, if you want to start doing it that way, you can. It's really cheap. It's about $6 or something like $6-7. So that's the way to do it with Canons. And Nikons, they do have a built-in, some of them, I think most of them do actually, have a built-in intervalometer. So when you go in the menu settings, you can choose intervalometer, and once you hit the shutter button, you're good to go. You're good to let it run. But what I've been doing recently is something that I talked about in, let's see, what podcast was it? Podcast 43, I think, where I talked about the trigger trap. That is probably way better than intervalometer. It's more expensive, not that much, but if you have a smartphone, an Android or an iPhone, you pick it up for $30, and you can do a whole lot more plus time lapse. So that's one cool thing that I would definitely recommend, and it's just that easy. It basically takes the easiness of shooting with an iPhone or a GoPro and squishes it into an iPhone app, and you're able to take time-lapse photos. So one question that I have kind of picked out of Rachel's email is, do I shoot stills or do I shoot video for time-lapse? I used to think when I first started looking at time-lapse that I used to think that that's how they did it, is video. They would take a camcorder or something like that, a Sony cam or whatever, and set it on a tripod, point it at your subject, and just let a video roll for however long, and then speed it up in post. That's how I started doing it. I think the very first time lapse that I took was I at sunset. I was living in my apartment at the time, and at sunset I drove over to like a field that had I guess it would be it was like a hay shelter or something. I don't even know what you call them. A place where you put a bunch of hay for farm animals and stuff. But the roof had slats in it, so it was kind of exposed. And so I pointed it out there and just let the sun go down. So as you pointed at the sun, so as you can see the sun just moving from, let's say 9 o'clock on the clock all the way down to 7, 8, somewhere around there. So it kind of moved a little bit, and it took that long. I think I said it for 30 minutes, and it took 30 minutes for it to go that far. So when I got back home, I was all really excited. I was like, cool, I got my first time lapse. And number one, it took forever to take a 4 gig file, I think, and transfer it to my computer, load it into the video editor, and speed it up. It took forever to do that. And I only got, I think, 8-10 seconds out of that whole thing. And it really wasn't that impressive, because all it was just a big sunball moving, an inch. So I kept trying to figure out how they did this. How do you do all this cool time-lapse stuff where, you just see clouds rolling through everywhere? And that's when I learned that you have to do them as stills. And what stills do is give you a lot of control when you're in post to edit each photo if you wanted to. I wouldn't recommend that, but edit each photo to bring out a little more detail and shadows. You can change the white balance, all that stuff. You have a whole lot more detail when you're working with that, opposed to video where you have a whole lot more hassle applying all these individual edits to your photo or to your video. So I would definitely not recommend doing video. That's maybe for a short thing. Maybe, like if you're going downtown or something like that and you want to take a picture or do a time lapse of the cars rolling by and you don't have the equipment for you, yeah, that's fine. Maybe a 10-minute video, if you're only going to use it for a little bit. That's not a big deal. But if you know that, you're going to set up shop at some place for 45 minutes to an hour and you want to have more control of what you're doing the time lapse on, then definitely make sure you got all your stuff with you. And there's one other thing that I want to cover that I'm gonna save the rest of it till next week. And what that is the settings between your the photos taken. So there's ways to do this, and each one of them calls for a different scenario. So let's say you're taking a picture of the Milky Way at night and you want to get it moving across the sky. You're not going to want to take a photo every second, every 2 seconds, every 3 seconds, because it's not going to move that much. So when you have an object moving slower in your frame, you want a little bit of a longer distance between each picture taken. So let's do the Milky Way thing. You take it. Number one, you need a very longer exposure at night to get a clear shot. So let's say your exposure lasts 20 seconds. So that's how long it takes to take the picture. So in between that 20 seconds, you want to have maybe another 10 to 15 seconds for the next 20 seconds to take the photo. So basically you got 20 seconds here, let's say 15 here, and then 20 here. That's 55 seconds to take 2 photos. Seems like a lot just for 2 photos, but when you're taking something like that, you need a whole lot more time to get more movement. Now, on the other side, if you're taking pictures of cars driving by, you can take a time-lapse photo every 2 seconds, 3 seconds. And it's when, let's say it's bright sunlight, bright day outside, you only need like a fraction of a second for it to take the photo. So maybe 1/500th of a second, boom. And then you wait 2 seconds, takes another photo, wait 2 seconds, takes another photo. And when you get those in, because you have more frames, your time lapse will ultimately be longer as opposed to the Milky Way shot. It's going to, let's say you have, let's say it took, let's just rough it and say 2 seconds for the car shot. So you're basically going to have roughly around 30 frames in 1 minute. So the Milky Way shot, you got 2 frames in 1 minute. So 30 to 2. And it's all because of the subject. Now, I'm trying my best to explain this because it took a long time for me to figure out how many frames to do in what minute and how long it's going to take. So that's basically the settings as far as the distance between each frame. Now, next week, what I'm going to do, since I'm rolling this into next week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the settings that you need to take your time lapse, the gear you might need, any accessories that you might find helpful, stuff like that. So I hope you enjoyed that, Rachel. Basically, you get 2 episodes this time. So let's go ahead and get into the widget of the week, and then we'll wind this up. The widget of the week is actually something that involves time lapse, but it's something that you wouldn't think of, and it's an egg timer, and not any just regular old egg timer, but it's an IKEA egg timer. And I'll put a link into the show notes. And what it is it's a 30-minute, or it might be an hour. I think it's 30 minutes. It's a 30-minute egg timer, but it looks like a canister. It looks like a small silver canister. And so this is especially helpful if you have a GoPro or if you even have a mount for your phone. And so what you do with that egg timer is you stick the GoPro on top of the egg timer. And so when you twist to start the egg timer going, it starts to spin. And as the egg timer spins, your camera will spin. So in 30 minutes, or an hour, I think it's 30 minutes though. In 30 minutes, your camera will spin in a perfect, 180 degree motion while taking a time lapse. So what's cool about that is you can do more movement. So going back to what I was talking about earlier, those Kessler cranes, that's sort of what they do. They not only do they stay stationary for your subject to a time lapse, but they also move forward or move back. Some even move forward and rotate, that sort of thing. So this is kind of like a makeshift way of doing that. I ordered mine just a little bit ago. So what I'll do is I'll put a link to that as well in the show notes, and you can check that out for yourself. It's like $10 for that little egg timer. Will give you a really cool effect, and a really cool movement in your time lapses for smaller items like a GoPro, for cheap, for $10 bang for your buck, just to get a cool motion in your time lapse. The only thing you need to do is make sure you remember to take it with you, because no one ever remembers, or no one ever thinks of taking an egg timer when you go out to take a time lapse. But I just thought that was a cool little neat thing. So that's about it. Head over to picturemon.com/PMP046 and you can see all the cool things that I talked about there. Thank you again, Rachel, for your question. Everybody else who might have questions, please feel free to send them in. You can email them to me, picturemonk@gmail.com. Go to picturemonk.com, fill out the contact form, tweet me, Facebook me, Instagram, direct me, whatever. You can do all that kind of stuff. I'm pretty accessible. So, besides giving my phone number out, I'm pretty accessible. Thanks again for joining me, guys. I very much appreciate you hanging in there with me. And next week we'll finish up the time lapse and get in some other cool stuff. Send your questions my way, and don't forget to rate and subscribe to the podcast. That would really help out the show. And that's about it. This is PictureMonk.com. Jordan from PictureMonk.com. This is Jordan from PictureMonk.com, and I'll see you guys later.